Final Fantasy III, released in Japan April 27th of 1990, would not see its release in the United States until it was remade for 3D on the Nintendo DS in 2006. It would see later releases to iOS, Android, PSP, and Steam. The Final Fantasy III that we saw here in the United States on the Super Nintendo was actually Final Fantasy VI, something that still confuses some people to this day. The Pixel Remaster version was released in July of 2021. Final Fantasy III brings back many of the things that had been altered from Final Fantasy I to II back to the original state. The traditional experience system is back, and we go back to having unnamed characters again. This review is focusing on the Pixel Remaster, not the 3D remake where they were named. One of the changes kept from Final Fantasy II is that each character can be whatever you want them to be. This time not only because anybody can just be anything, but because one of the best things to come to the Final Fantasy series, the job system. I absolutely love the idea of a job system in games. I love being able to change my party's skills and abilities on a whim, and giving the whole new way of replayability to a game. From the original release to the Pixel Remaster, they did get rid of the need of job points to switch jobs, which, in my opinion, did kind of make the game a little bit easier. Now there are no repercussions to switching your jobs at the drop of a hat. You can just do this whenever you please. Now, while there are plenty of jobs to choose from, not all of them are going to be created equally, or will they let you continue to use them until the end of the game when you get things that are going to be better. For example, certain jobs are only going to be situational, and unless you want to do something unique with your party, you're probably not going to use them outside of that moment, such as the Geomancer, the Dark Knight, the Scholar, the Bard, and the Dragoon. Others, again, as I mentioned earlier, once you get their upgrade, you really won't go back to them, like the Warrior, the Monk, the White Mage, the Black Mage, Red Mage, Evoker, and then later on, the Knight, Black Belt, Devout, and Magus, which replace some of those other jobs, get replaced with the Ninja and Sage jobs if you do venture down to get those. Now, to be fair, again, they only get replaced if you grab those last two jobs. The job system itself is still a very good system, and if you're into that kind of thing, it is great and makes this game so much better. The music, once again, is just outstanding. While the music in the original Final Fantasy III was great as is, this reorchestrated version was fantastic. It brought even more life and enjoyment to what was already there. Unlike with Final Fantasy II, where even with the reorchestrated music, where it was more beautiful sounding and a lot more interesting, I still found myself getting slightly bored with that music. Whereas in Final Fantasy III, I never felt that way. The music was just absolutely enjoyable the entire time, whether we're talking the battle music, the victory music, the boss music, the town music, overworld. It is just so much going on with those songs and the little things that were happening with the new instrumentation of it that just made it great to listen to the entire time. I remember in both my playthroughs of the original Final Fantasy III through emulation and the 3D remake that the grind required to succeed in the Crystal Tower, but I honestly don't feel like I needed to grind much at all in this Pixel Remaster, at least not for levels. I did have to grind here and there for some gills so I could buy some equipment, but I never felt I had to grind because I was under-leveled. And job leveling I feel like was tweaked for this Pixel Remaster as well. As in the 3D remake, I never came close to having a job level maxed, and that was with level grinding in that 3D remake. In this version, I had the Black Mage job maxed out before I even got to the Magus job. So there was a lot of rebalancing done there, and I felt like it made that part easier, and again, overall made the game a little bit easier too. story-wise, this game's alright. There's nothing too spectacular, but none of the story felt out of place either. Whereas in Final Fantasy II, the temporary fourth slot party members got more character development than any of the main characters, in this game I feel like the temporary party members you gained were honestly not even really necessary. And had this been some type of action game or MMORPG, it would have been more like an escort quest with them than anything else. And honestly, I forgot some of those people were with me until the next part of their story happened, which usually was very quick, honestly. The idea of there not being able to be too much light or too much dark in the world, I feel like is a decent story background, and the inclusion of the Dark Warriors in conjunction with our Light Warriors was a nice touch. Now, Cloud of Darkness is blamed as being that first Final Fantasy in-game boss that is the bigger, more eviler one than what we've been preparing for during our playthrough. However, I don't feel like that is completely accurate. She's hinted at being a thing around the midway point of the game, so she really isn't a surprise out of nowhere boss, unlike we get in some of the later Final Fantasy games. And while not the strongest story ever written for a game, it is far from being the worst story written either. So, outside of the job system being added in for this game, what really is different about Final Fantasy III compared to Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy II that really sets it apart aside from these jobs? Not much. It kind of takes the best of both Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy II, puts those things together with some new additions like the job system, and really flourishes with it. But it really doesn't play that much differently from Final Fantasy 1 and 2 in the grand scheme of things. It's again another NES game. If you enjoy those, it's a great addition to a library. But again, not much in the realm of a breakthrough outside of that job system, which is a big thing. I'm not trying to discount that at all. But overall, the game didn't change much from the first two releases. In conclusion, Final Fantasy III is a definite upgrade from Final Fantasy II, but I still hold Final Fantasy I above this game when it comes to the NES releases, and that might just be due to pure nostalgia, as Final Fantasy I again was my first Final Fantasy game I had ever played. Final Fantasy III is still a good solid game that is fairly easy to 100% complete in its pixel remaster form, and isn't a chore to do so. The jobs were a fun add-in to the game and would later be improved on in Final Fantasy V. Overall, I would rate this game an 8.5 out of 10. Final Fantasy III is definitely a game to have in your collection if you are a fan of the series. However, unless you were a fan of the old NES style of gameplay, I would suggest you go with the 3D remake over this one. That being said, it is still a solid pickup if you don't mind owning both versions of the game, regardless of it being on sale or not. I would suggest this game if you are interested in it. Thanks for watching my review video over the Final Fantasy III Pixel Remaster. If you'd like, you can check out the other Pixel Remaster reviews I've left, and if you'd also like to, you could check out my playthrough of Final Fantasy III Pixel Remaster. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and see you next time.